the British crown at the rate of £5,000 per annum, which is about $250,000 in today's terms. But in return, he was required to rewrite his will. At a joint meeting between Prince Edward, Countess Marguerite, and the Pope, a suitable rewording was agreed. The new will was made in 1802, but the inheritance still rested with Prince Edward. The revised document substituted the will with so in favor of that fact, the British became by virtue of the good relationship. The British suicide in July 1807, decided that the second will was actually less appropriate than the former. They therefore ignored the 1802 document and referred to Henry's original will of 1789, and the press reported that Henry had made his explicit request to his relation of Stuart, meaning Edward Green. However, no one in England thought to inquire who this relation might be. Having dealt with the first hurdle, the Hanoverian ministers then produced Henry's amended 1802 will. By virtue of its malleable nature, the wording, that is, in favor of that prince that he was assumed by virtue of future blood relationship, was strategically implemented in favor of Charles Emmanuel IV, ex-king of Sardinia. He had recently abdicated to join the Jesuit order, so the Stuart legacy passed to a potentially childless monk. Charles Emmanuel duly wrote to King George's Parliament denouncing the nomination because he knew the Stuarts to be alive and well. Indeed, having lived with him in Sardinia from 1797, Marguerite and her son Edward had been resident at his house by the Porto in Rome. The correspondence was ignored at Westminster, and the whole issue was put under wraps in Britain. History now records the diverted succession as having progressed from Sardinia through Modena into Bavaria. The reality is that the legitimate royal house of Stuart exists today and has long been actively interested in European constitutional management. In 1809, a dispute over sovereign loyalties arose between two sons of George III. It became known as the War of the Brothers. Prince Edward, Duke of Kent, the father of Queen Victoria, was a Freemason. Prince Augustus Frederick, Duke of Sussex, was a Knight Templar. Edward's problem was that his brother's Templar colleagues were Stuart supporters. He therefore endeavored to sway their allegiance to the reigning House of Hanover. And he eventually failed, but compromised by creating a Templar-style branch within the existing Masonic structure. This fell under the protectorate of Kent and was the English York Rite of Freemasonry. The chivalric Templars secured the Scottish Rite under the protectorate of Prince Edward James Stuart, second Count of Albany. There is thereby years of research that I've done that I have given you over this project. I continue. While the exiled Stuarts were in France and Italy, they were deeply involved with the general growth and dissemination of Freemasonry. They were the instigators of the exportation of Scottish Rite, which had high degree and held more profound history than other movements. Prominent in this movement was Charles Edward's cousin and mentor, the Comte de Saint-Germain. The Stuarts' involvement was firmly based on established rights and privileges, with a desire to initiate brethren into the true antiquity and pedigree of the craft. In England, the inherent secrecy of the club-like lodges provided the perfect facility for undercover intrigue against the Whigs and the German succession. Throughout the land, the Jacobite societies and Tory lodges became closely entwined, as a result of which They became prime targets for Whig intelligence, whose high-ranking Secret Service operatives duly infiltrated.
Throughout the land, the Jacobite societies and Tory lodges became closely entwined. As a result, however, they became
of brotherly love, faith, and charity.
26th Volume 118, February 24th, 1974, testimony of Jose Delgado. The Glass House tapes by Louis Tackwood. The Great Heroin Code by Henry.
Lodges of the traditional style.
Throughout the land, the Jacobite societies and Tory lodges became closely
Dr.
entwined.
Robert Watson purchased in Rome some
They became prime targets for Whig intelligence, whose high-ranking Secret Service operatives duly infiltrated the fraternities. In later years, English Freemasonry dispensed with political intrigue to become more concerned with allegorical representation in the codes of brotherly love, faith, and charity. And if you believe that, you're not playing with a full deck of cards. That's what they want you to believe. That's what he wants you to believe. But it's not true. He continues, in Europe, however, many scientifically based intellectual lodges of the traditional style are still extant. In 1817, a Dr. Robert Watson purchased in Rome some of Cardinal Henry's documents concerning the Stuart dynasty. He paid 23 pounds sterling, equivalent to about 610 pounds today, which is probably around $1,200 US dollars, and prepared to publish the contents. But before he had a chance to do this, the files were seized by the papal police and passed to London so that their contents would not become known. Sometime later, the doctor received a payment from Westminster for having been deprived of his property. Not content with this, Watson pursued his right to the papers, only to be found dead, supposedly having committed suicide in 1838. The papers have never since appeared in the public domain. Along with Cardinal Henry, the Abbey Waters also lost his possessions and became a pensioner of King George. Waters, an executor for Charlotte of Albany, was the custodian of various other Stuart papers. His guardianship, of which constituted the route to his future Hanoverian income, and in 1805 the Abbey was obliged to pass them over to the British government. At length, some were deposited at Windsor Castle, where they remain today. As for the rest, their whereabouts are conveniently unknown. And, folks, if I had to make a bet, remember the fire they had at Windsor Castle? Remember that fire? If I had to make a bet, I bet those papers were all burned. Anything that would legitimize the claim to the throne of the House of Stuart was most probably destroyed in that fire. By virtue of these documentary acquisitions, the way was deemed clear for Prince Edward James to be totally excluded from historical records in Britain. But this was not the case in continental Europe, where he is well documented in papers held by the Stuart trustees and features in the writings of Renee, Viscount Chateaubriand, Abbey James Waters, Princess Caroline Murat, and others. Although the Stuarts have been ignored by the British authorities since the death of Cardinal Henry, the descendants of Prince Edward James, Count Stewart, second Count of Albany, have been actively engaged in social, political, military, and sovereign affairs for the past 2 centuries. They have often advised governments on constitutional and diplomatic matters in an effort to promote the ideals of public service and religious toleration as upheld by their own reigning house, and they have been particularly concerned with matters of trade, welfare, and education. In 1888, Prince Edward's grandson, Charles Benedict James Stuart, 4th Count of Albany, was scheduled to visit Britain. He was due to attend a grand Stuart exhibition at the New Gallery, London. It was sponsored by the Order of the White Rose, and the main organizers were Bertram, Earl of Ashburnham, and Melville Matthew, Marquis de Rouvigny, but the exhibition was wholly undermined by Hanoverian agents, and Prince Charles Benedict, guess what, was found dead, presumed murdered, in Italy. There was no display in 1888 after all. A rather different exhibition was held the following year. Instead of being in honor of the Stuarts as was planned, it was promoted to celebrate the bicentenary of the Whig Revolution, which had deposed James VII, which would be the second, and the Stuarts in 1688. The exhibition's new patron was Queen Victoria herself, and the event was used as a tool to obtain even more valuable documents of Stuart heritage. Having been ousted from their papers, and the Marquis de Ruvigny directed their future interests towards the chivalric societies of Europe, the Order of the Realm of Sion, the Knights Protectors of the Sacred Sepulchre, and the Order of the Sangreal. The governor of Oklahoma, ladies and gentlemen, who was the governor at the time of the bombing of the Alfred P. Murrah Federal Building, is a member of the Knights Protectors of the Sacred Sepulchre. And, you might want to pursue some of that. Who knows? Don't go away. I'll be right back after I rest my throat for a second, get a little drink of water, and we'll continue.
Wow, what a sad world we live in. Bill Cooper, educatesurf.org. It's a good information to learn from the 90s, late 90s. Of the history of the subject of Freemasonry The Illuminati, the 13 bloodline families that are being hacked. So you might not even hear after home invasion. This is years and years and years of information stumbled across. Right. So there is a clan. There is a demonic clan. Right, I should just catch up really. There's a lot of people covering this subject, but I don't know who is aware of what. But they keep hacking this format all the time, no matter what. So just filling in some stuff. Right. Just check the stream. It's just changed over. So hacking doesn't stop at 11:30 at night. Let's see. Right, so while they keep hacking that, it doesn't matter what device you use, everyone can hear. The noise in the background is artificial intelligence computer screeching program. People don't realise this by now. The frequencies that just go back into the stream. Bill Cooper. William Bill Cooper. Beyond a Pale Horse. And the Illuminati bloodline. Wow. There's a lot of past history which she did uncover very well. Goes back a long time ago. Goes back a long time ago. Right, the year's 2050. Not really, but it will be. By the time the Agenda 2030 is already here in England, anyway. The assumptions of alien invasions is going to be, especially this period of time, Easter. You see, when you examine the Bill Cooper, World of Property, Mars, Bill Cooper, he had a guest on, and that's the year 1993. So they just out there killed him years ago. But you see, when you look at history, if you want to educate yourself.org on the website streaming across the channel, there's a lot of helpful information that breaks down who are the bloodlines, who are the 13 bloodline families, who are the banking families. So you've got the Morgan family, the Rothschilds, a lot more to do with that. And what is it about? Why are these 13 bloodlines so special? Well, they're not really. It's just that they've been infiltrated. You see, When you research the greatest mysteries of the universe, the alien agenda, when you look at the true hidden origins of spirituality subject, and you find and investigate quite a few facts, and it's nothing to do with conspiracy theory. It just goes on facts. So, mainstream media, well, the future of humanity is like many of the only source I found credible for all these years to be steadfast. Well, the hour, the time, it is Bill Cooper's Legacies, his book, and so many other people has been getting information out on different platforms now. The shift's already happened with the spirituality room and the off planets, the mind labs, the super soldier program. Yeah, they the control matrix. I mean, all these sci-fi movies have always been predicting and trying to hint to the populace that what was generally in history and in genealogy through family bloodlines, I suppose, a mainstream education is what, you don't question anything at school or college until you see a pattern of events. End of times is already here in that regard. Now, my upbringing on the mainstream religious Freemasonry connections of the organised religion I was raised in, well, when you look at the subject, say, for example, frequencies, space, and you look at these futuristic movies, for example, or even TV shows, like, for example, you've got this subject Looking Glass and Disney, look at history. I mean, historically, it's important to look at history of events in the past and do your research independently to get to the facts. Why am I heavily targeted? Why I'm heavily censored? Why I have so much blocking my internet network? Why am I subject of interest for the MI5, MI6? Good question. Wow. GHQ, whatever. Because unfortunately, when you have acquisitive insight to life, you go down a few rabbit holes and you go find things out, and you come out of a rabbit hole, go down another, and here we are to date, completely waking up to a lot of facts. I don't go on fiction, I go on facts, and therefore you're just being on the radar to one to watch. There are really positive, unseen positive energy around if you can tap into it. There's a YouTube channel called Look Out for Charlie. He breaks down with the frequencies. The radiation is the biggest one. With the 5G technology, they're working on 6G already. I'm not sure what country they're working on that one, but the 5G is just absolutely radiation outside. The CMEs of the sun projection, Earth facing as well, yesterday, today's date, depending where you live in the world, of course, and that affects the body essence. The body's made of water, and you've got your natural aura around the body, and that's been affected by its external frequencies that messes up the DNA and the genes and the health of the human body. So therefore, although the physical body might be negatively effective, it's important to have a spirituality awareness. So whatever subject, whatever belief system one has, because let me just bear with me a moment. Right. There is Beyond the Veil is one good subject on Bill Cooper. There's somebody that's uploading a lot of old radio shows of Bill Cooper, and on the channel called Bill Cooper, William Cooper, and depending what subject you want to go into, I would always suggest to look at the 13 bloodline family to start with, and the historic. You're looking at 15th century, 17th century, then you bring it forward to the 18th century, and then here we are into the 19th century, and the technology version, for example, Tesla, the wireless technology he designed, all those period of a long time ago. But JP Morgan didn't really want to back up the funding for the development of that. I'm not sure. It could have been 1920, the year, or it could have been a different year, but within the 19th century, early 19th century. And yet it's only been, Wi-Fi has only been around, so-called mainstream society, for how many years now? And mobile phone technology. So when you look at all these patterns, and you can Google patterns, any kind of subject that one may be interested in, it's all really inventions. Where do people come up with ideas of scripts for movies, TV shows, music industry? Where do they come up with the ideas of inventions? Soon as you come up with an invention for free energy, that gets taken over. Why? Because these big corporations can't make any money off it. They can't make profit. It's only by the 2050, it's only going to be a few selected international corporations that's going to hold majority of shares on a lot of inventions, and the zero income new way of so-called NWO. I call it New World Order, but it's just a policy. It's a global agenda for the world. Some of it, well, it's too late for damaging the planet already by the fossil fuels, and damaging by the pollution, and much more to do with the weather. They've been damaging with the heart geoengineering for years. So it affects the nature and water, life itself on Earth. And then you've got people still having kids, but yet they're not having, a lot of these inbred families mixing with the DNA, non-human DNA, like in the Book of Enoch and Genesis, and mixing, they call it fallen angels, no such thing. The demonic entities mixing with human. On the earth, it's alleged that humans were only, I would just put alleged because you need to do the research. They were manufactured to be a slave race for the Anunnaki, Nephilim races, to mine gold on Earth. As again, you need to do the research, and if you don't want to know, that's up to individual. But be aware where the human individual came from. We are soul beings, and there are different races out there, and you may not be aware about the advancement technology in cloning, and you may not be aware of the program called Super Soldier, how they use black ops, my labs, NK Ultra of the mind to imply that someone's been adopted by an alien, but yet it's either of a human military black ops agent, or it is a non-human species taking the form of a shapeshifter but into a human clone body, to come and do certain things to the individual. And sometimes the individual can be in their own home, and they'll be taking their souls, will be taking into this advanced technology to be taking to do the experiments and participate of planet war, space wars, for federations. It's not always a positive thing. They have technology where it can wipe the memories of the mind. So when the individual wakes up in a conscious state, meant to be from sleep, one will not have memories of it. But there be physical effects of that. So one will be physically exhausted, the nerves, the body will be exhausted. There'd be like a mind, there'd be like a fog kind of effect in the mind and the brain. And I've got certain audio evidence of certain things I won't make public. Um, and also individuals might notice cars or the odd vans. I mean, at the moment it's a white theme at the moment with the vans. There's some blogs I came across at the weekend, and it described what the white vans is about. I won't go into that right now. So if one does really want to know some basics, because if you don't have that information, what's about to fly off to humanity's sake on this earth, literally a matter of weeks rather than days, rather than months, then the soul will be completely unprepared. And the first time ever I've ever heard within a commercial radio broadcast to be prepared for a bug out bag. They played it off. This is in England, in my area. They played it off as a just be prepared for in case for a flood. Well, we're not in an area for rivers to rise or a floodplain area. And for that radio station, which covers this area, it wasn't, it should have not have been played that way. And where I was, I questioned a couple of people, the staff I was. One's ex-military, young guy. He's fully aware of being trained. Always have a bug out bag, being prepared, survival, just in case. I've always had that, I've always known that ever since I was young. But some people are not aware. They're in the world. They rather have the BMW cars, money, and all this. Money is not going to be in existence very soon. The economy, it's already crashing. And if you don't have any bartering items, basic things, the Great Depression all those years ago, if you want to research the banking families within the particular ones you want to research is Anchor, and there's the typical ones, which is Morgan. You've got a couple others, but they are connected, very deep rooted within the crown. Goes back in royalty, the bloodline in England especially, and you might want to look in to see a bit deeper into London Bridge has gone down, or London Bridge is falling down, or also that terminology. It's like a code word for if anything that happens to the Queen of England, then that's a code word. So there's all this different prophecies, different people coming out, ministries, saying that the Antichrist is going to be this, that, and the other. But I have my theory on that one, which I won't go into now. But let me just check the strength of the stream. See if they've still got the AI technology with interference. There's 5 minutes. Let's see this. 5 minutes. Let's see this. 5 minutes. Right, let's stop the sharing screen sharing for a moment. 5 minutes. Right, let's stop the sharing screen sharing for a moment. 5 minutes. I think it might be worth trying to get a website up actually. About 13 bloodline families. Let's have a look if I can find it. See if I can actually open this. I might have it. Let's have a look, see if I can make a search on this. Let's have a look. Right. Let's see. All right, here we go. So we'll do a search for that one. The New World Order overview. Illuminati is the oldest term commonly used to refer to 13 bloodline families and their offshoots, and that make up the majority proportion of these controlling elites. And most members of the Illuminati are also members in the highest ranks of numerous secretive and occult societies, in many cases extend straight back into the ancient world. The upper levels of the tightly comprised, so I've just got NWO, so I'm just going to get this screen share. And it goes back into the to the black nobility of Europe, dominated, as I said before, by the British Crown, which goal is to create a one-world fascist government, alleged. stripped the nationalist and regional boundaries, but is obedient to their agenda. Their intention is to effect complete and total control. Every human individual on the planet and to dramatically reduce the world's population by 6.5 billion people to 500 million. While the New World Order, and I've seen 2 independent films dated 1981, by the way, that's predicted all this. Right, the whole through that storyline, somebody all those years ago in the movie industry have been trying to leak information to warn the public all that's taking place now. All those years ago when I was a young woman, all those what I know now is all predicted in that movie. And because I have a religious upbringing, I completely, absolutely was shocked to see those 2 movies that was there in black and white. Well, not black and white, but in the movie. And it's worth rewatching. I'm going to try and make that public playlist so people can see it. But the intention is to effect complete and total control, as I said. Now, the term the New World Order is frequently used when referring to this group. It's more usually to identify the principal organisations, institutions, individuals who make up this vast interlocking spiderweb of elite conspirators. The Illuminati is the oldest term, commonly used to refer to the 13 bloodline families and the offshoots that make up majority portion of this controlling of the elites. Most members of the Illuminati are also members of the highest ranks of numerous secretive, very occultish societies, which in many cases it goes back into the ancient world. The upper levels of the tightly compartmentalized secretive committees, which name such as the Council of Three, the Council of Five, the Council of Seven, the Council of Nine, the Council of 13, and of course the Council of 33, and the Grand Duet Council Committee of 300, also called the Olympians, and the Committee of 500, amongst others. Now, 1992, Dr. John Coleman published a book, Conspirators' Hierarchy, the story of the Committee of 300, with laughable scholarship and a lot of research. Dr. Coleman identifies the players and carefully details the Illuminati agenda, worldwide domination and control. On his book, on page 161, Dr. Coleman accurately summarized the intent and proposed of the Committee of 300 as follows, an abstract. So I'm going to go into my screen to screen share this, even though they're blocking people to come in my stream. This is a short one that people can go investigate and watch if they care to know more. Right, let me just get it up. Here we go. This is the page. First of all, let's go to top of page. The New World Order and Overview. Now, this article should give a date. If not, you can go people can go and research if they want. Right, see if I can expand this bigger to see. Yeah. So in the middle of the screen, on started from the left to the right. A one world government, a one world monetary system, and a permanent and non-electric hierarchy. I'm skipping a few words out. You self-select from among their members in the form of a federal system, feudal system, as it was in the Middle Ages. In this one world entity, population will be limited by reduction on the number of children per family. Diseases, wars, famine. You see around the world now at the moment, famine. See what's going on over certain parts of China as I speak of today. See what's going on with Russia and Ukraine. Look at what's meant to be happening again. There's predictions people might be relaxing for Easter period, but yet things are going to start hitting again in June. Yet again, more things this year, and it won't stop. I've come across some papers and documents in England. What's going to happen? That I won't go into right now. Now, until 1 billion people who are useful to the ruling class in areas which will be strictly and clearly defined remain as a total world population. There will be no middle classes, only rulers and the servants. All laws will be uniform under a legal system of world courts. That's under the UN, okay, United Nations. One world army, one world courts. Yeah. Participate in the same unified code of laws, backed up by one world government police force. You see, and don't forget they're using technology. If you look at a movie called Majority Report and just think it's a good movie, but look at the script, and then you'll see the future pre-crime using advancement in technology and policing. It's already started, but this article go forward. So unified military to enforce laws in all former countries where no nation boundaries shall exist. The system will be on the basis of a welfare state, one universal income. People won't be working. They'll be on the megaverse, the new type of internet or social media with the headsets on. They'll be ordering their food within their apartment. They wouldn't need to leave. Yeah, why do you think all the lockdowns as well? Maybe might be preparing people for getting used to that. A different way of living in the smart agenda, smart cities, everything, and with limited travel. You wouldn't need to travel if you got virtual reality headset on. You put that on, and then your mind takes you off to wherever you want to go. I mean, this advancement is very advanced already in technology, and they're testing out for so long the brain interface, especially, and D-Wave technology on target individuals without consent, by the way. The medical field as well, and the monetary system is all entwined together with the digital AI of things. It's much more than AI. But anyway, I'll carry on with this article. The all former countries, I mean, I do not give a monkeys because they go on fear. These demonic entities behind all this are going on fear. Whatever you powers that be are doing to me and much more. And if I'm not an expert, but I've got I'm I have my gut feeling, my gut instinct, my spiritual essence knows what your demonic entities are doing and are still doing and will not stop. But don't forget your time's coming to an end. It's great to see a world awakening to these demonic entities and the corruption. Right, I'll go on, I diverse, let's go back. Those who are obedient and subservient bow down to their masters, in other words, to the one world government, will be rewarded with the means to live. Does that remind you of the Hunger Games? Are the TV programs out there called Hunger Games? For those that don't go along with their plans, they'd be hunted like a pack of wolves, maybe. Those who are rebellious will simply starve to death or be deprived or declared outlaws. It's more like you're on a target. This is a target for anyone who wishes to kill them. Can you imagine that? Sounds like a sci-fi movie. That's reality now. Privately owned firearms or weapons of any kind will be forbidden. Haven't they done that already in certain countries? The sheer magnitude and complex web of deceit surrounding individuals or organisations involved in this conspiracy is mind-boggling. Even for the most astute among us, most people react with disbelief and scepticism towards the topic, unaware that they've been conditioned and brainwashed. This article is quite extensive, even for those that are really skeptical and disbelieve a lot of things. They believe the mainstream narrative, institutionalized and media influences that were created by the mother all mind control. Does that render anything? Guess where it came from? Tavistock Institute of Human Relations in London. I was there when the personal things happened to my private life. Go back to from 2002. I had no clue they were behind a lot of things at the time. Now the author, and there's a gentleman that quotes about the top 13 bloodline families, say that most people have, just get this, have been built inside that short circuit the mind's critical examination, perhaps when it comes to certain sensitive topics. There's so many good programs out there that's hinting what's going on for a long time. It's a CIA term for, let me just go into make sure I've got this, for the world conspiracy often solicits mind response. Many people, and it goes into the author's book, on trauma-based programming, i.e. trauma-based mind control. The processes while the intended victim is still within the womb. Can you believe that? They start child while within the womb of the mother. Mind control is such a greater problem than the most people realise, according to, and it's another individual, a former Illuminati, let me just get that correct, a former Illuminati mind control programmer. There are 10 million people who have been programmed as mind controlled slaves. And this is what they have been put me into ever since I was a child. I had no idea until 2018, but I do now know. Using trauma-based MC programs, which is like the names they use, is Monarch Project, NK Ultra. The newer is non-trauma. The electronic means the MC programming and grew out of the Montauk project. May include millions more. Then there goes into somebody who is part of this principle into the development of the Montauk project. Said that there are likely to be 10 million victims of this style mind control programming worldwide. The majority located in the USA, but there's loads of people I know about observing in England as well. He also said that there are convert, which I know about that, centres. These are underground dumps, super soldier subject dumps, military bases in every major city in the US, but this is also in England too. Most Americans believe the project opinion. Let me just get rid of the pop-ups. Let me just go and show quickly. I'm not going to spend too much time on this. So you've also got the well-known called Rand Corporation mold, Tavistock. You've got the Stanford Research Institute. And if I could get my actual software, I could show you how many people are hacking into me right now. I might try and do that. I'll stop sharing this page. And try and get the program up and show the evidence of the hacking into my network. Should be able to get it up. Just check my audio. is to effect complete and total control. Just say this is sharing. Just say this is sharing. Just say this is sharing. Okay. This evidence of hacking. Well, results. I will keep going. I've gone through that, so let's have a look. Take over the jobs of US soldiers. Right, let's have a look at this. The New World Order puppeteers provide the solution by sending in UN peacekeepers. UN coalition of the Gulf War goes into history about that. Once they go there, they never leave. The New World Order control ground troops in all major countries to siege areas where significantly resistance to the New World Order takeover is likely to be encountered. They're being trained up underground bases. The occultists training people up to take over and to deal with those that shall resist the New World Order takeover. There's an article back in 14th March 1999, virtually the same strategy used to occupy certain countries in the UN, NATO troops was applied by the New World Order manipulators to take over military of the East. It goes into what area that was. The same mortality play is tilted out of public consumption. The local evil and demonic Indonesia army quotes trained millions can't pronounce that, are responsible for the slaughter of innocent civilians following the August 30th for independence from Indonesia control and must be stopped at all cost. This time it quotes Australia to keep up the appearance of international humanity. Efforts will lead to the charge with the peacekeeping troops, of course. It didn't take long for, and it goes into a lot of reference to the past on that subject. I won't go into that right now, but you can read all this article on educateyourself.org yourself. The local sovereign military force is either defeated, goes into that and how. In the case of the United States, it's itself replaced by the Foreign UN Partnership for Peace (PEP) troops, who take over the jobs of US soldiers, who have been sent overseas on peacekeeping missions, in addition to being killed in around conflicts of foreign soil. US military forces will likely be reduced in a few years. Through disease induced, it goes into from mandatory. The word mandatory you might want to look at. It goes into certain subjects it can't make public here. You might want to look into the article yourself here. Required of all United, well, this is worldwide, in England too, goes into certain subjects I cannot quote here. There's a past to date going on. Let me get rid of that, not showing that. Getting pop-ups. Right, what's the next part? The corporate proportion New World Order pyramid seems to be dominated first and foremost by Jewish Kabbalist international bankers. There's always a banking family. It quotes reference about the big pharmaceutical cartels, as well as other major multinational corporations. It quotes reference, I'm not sure exactly, but you can research yourself. The royal family of England, and mainly the Queen Elizabeth II, the House of Windsor, who are in fact descendants of the German army European royalty. The Saxe-Coburg Gotha family changed the name to Windsor in 1914. Are high-level players, it claims, with the British. You might want to go into reference to the controls of the Illuminati, reference to that maybe. Decision-making Illuminati nerve centres of this effort are in the London city. Oh my God, I knew it. The City of London is a city in its own right. It's a banking industry. It goes into Switzerland, Brussels, and the NATO headquarters. United Nations, along with the agencies working under the umbrella of the UN, such as the World Health Organization, who are full-time players. And this is an old article, so you see what's going on in the world now. The leaders of all major industrial countries, United States, England, Germany, Italy, Australia, New Zealand, etc., the G7, G8, active and fully cooperation and participants in this, the bigger picture, shall we say. In the century of the degree of control, by the extent of the Illuminati has advanced to this point that only certain handpicked individuals are groomed and selected by the Illuminati and even eligible to join the. You really might want to read all this. Most of the major wars, political upheavals, economic depression, recessions of the past 100 years and earlier were carefully planned and orchestrated by the. You might just want to go into that, go into the history of the Spanish-American War, 1898, World War One, World War Two, the Revolution of 1917, Great Depression, 1928 is key because of what's happening now. And 1939, the rise of the Nazi Germany, the Korean War, Vietnam War, 1989, 1991, fall of the sovereign communism, 1991 Gulf War. You might really want to look into the French Revolution, 1788. I told you, you might want to look into the history. So you might just really want to have, it goes into history of FEMA, created in 1979, as the Presidential Memorandum 32 authorized President Carter. Goes into that. A Harvard professor, former FEMA Advisory Board chairman, Huntington wrote the piece for the Trilateral Commission in the mid-1970s, in which he criticised democracy, economically development, and outdated ideas. The co-author of another report prepared for a trilateral commission, the crisis democracy on your right hand side, the screen sharing. To have come, and it goes into that, you might want to have a look. Yeah, so it's quite an extensive page of some facts and some force for those that might want to get information. You go, I'm not pushing that. Mind control section. Oh yeah, and it also goes into the Knights Templar, and it goes reference up here. Can be dated back into at least 12th century. Only a core group of the 9 members of the Illuminati group, called the Knights Templar, the military arm of the Illuminati secret society known as a prior of, and it quotes specific name for that, kicked off, and it goes into about the Crusades, Knights of Malta, Scottish Rites, Freemasonry. Goes into quite detail to go down to the subject of mind control again. Recent revelations from deprogrammed Illuminati government mind control individuals, such as it quotes who that is, and it gives some links. You can go and research. For example, Kathy O'Brien, Transformation of America. It goes into that. I don't think much to David Icke, but people might want to have a look just for reference. So yeah, educateyourself.org. Well, that was on that one. So the 21 goals of the Illuminati. And it just clearly states, 1993, the article, this is. Yeah. We're coming to the point at the moment, 16, to cause total collapse of the world economical and political chaos, to take control of all foreign and domestic policies, to give the fullest support to the the monetary fund. It's all about banking industry, isn't it? There's all these related. Now I'm going to play this in the background. Here you go.
I just want to give you a brief introduction to Dr. Coleman. I've been studying this for a long time and seeing what's happened to our country. And, it's kind of sad in this country that you have to come to a meeting on Saturday morning to get the truth. You can't turn on the television because you sure don't get the truth there. So we sure appreciate everybody coming out. But in order to do that, I ran across Dr. Coleman's work. And when you've studied this and look for the truth, and it's a pleasure to find somebody like Dr. Coleman that'll bring you to a new level of what the real truth, who's really behind what's going on in this country. None of this is an accident. This is orchestrated. This has been planned and plotted and is moving right along. And if the only thing that you can do is be informed and learn what's going on, who's really behind it. And nobody does that better than Dr. Coleman. He's an author of 3 books. He has a table back here. I recommend that you look through his material. It'll bring you to a new level of information as to what's going on in the country as well as the world. And this is the only country left that stands between the country as we know it, or the world as we know it, and the New World Order, which will drastically change everybody's lives, as Dr. Coleman will tell you. But the big difference between Dr. Coleman and some of the other speakers is he's been in most of the places that we're talking about. He's been in Lebanon, Brazil, France, Italy, Spain, England. He's been in Lebanon, France, Italy, Spain, England.
I hate to be all up in your face right now, but if you're an online business owner, I really do think this would be very valuable for you. So please watch this till the very end. I shifted my business.
Wow.
From doing 5K a month to 150K a month within the past couple of years just by changing my identity. I didn't change any single thing in my business. I promise you, I'm telling the truth. You know, I made YouTube videos back when I was doing 5K a month.
Here we go. I'm about to share a particular one. Bear with me. Right, this is the one. Let's see if it works.
We know it in the New
Just pause it.
World Order, which will drastically change everybody's life.
Let me just see if this is sharing. Delay reaction. Let's see what's coming on the screen yet. See what's coming on the screen. See what's coming on the screen. Look at that screeching. Wow, they're blocking sharing this screen. Oops, let's go in again. That's the one. Right, now I should be sharing it. Let's just check. Wow, they're blocking sharing this screen. Give it a minute and see how the hackers are trying to block it. Oops. Yeah, the hackers. Right, there you go. This is where you can find it on theeducatorself.org. I'm going to put it on a big screen. And here they go.
As Dr. Coleman will tell you. But the big difference between Dr. Coleman and some of the other speakers is he's been in most of the places that we're talking about. He's been in Lebanon, Brazil, France, Italy, Spain, England, South Africa, and all over the U.S. And he did this, in his work. He has firsthand experience with most of the things that are going on here. He studied 5 years in the British Museum in London, also in the Cave Museum in Egypt, where he did research on the Black Plague. And You know, if you study his work or read his work on AIDS, I think it'll shock most of you. In his investigation, you know, through the congressional records, and the congressional records is where most information is in this country, and he would feel very comfortable, you know, in debating the Supreme Court justice on the Constitution at any time, because our Constitution is basically being walked all over at this time. But at this time, I'd like to bring on Dr. Coleman, and let's give a big hand to him, and we appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for that great welcome. It's indeed a great pleasure for me to be among you here this morning. Looking at all these big fellows around the place, I feel a little small in stature, but I would remind you what Wellington told the German General Blücher at Waterloo when he rode up to inspect Wellington's troops. He saw the Scots and Irish guards on the hillside. He rode through them and he turned to Wellington and said, "They're rather small, aren't they?" And Wellington said, "Yes, but they don't run away." Ladies and gentlemen, I bring you a message of hope, not fear. A message that I hope will galvanize us all into much needed action. The problem is quite simple. Anarchy and chaos prevails in Washington, D.C. because the federal government has seized powers to which it is not entitled to and is passing masses of laws that are 100% unconstitutional. And when you get men setting themselves up as greater than the Constitution of the United States, you get anarchy and eventually tyranny. Now, I'm paranoid. I'm going to admit to you right up front. But let me tell you what the real meaning of the word paranoid is. It is a man or a person who has the ability to link events that seemingly are not connected. That is the true meaning of paranoia, or being paranoid. Of course, it's been used by our enemies, the socialists, the Marxists, the liberals, the so-called progressives, to smear us. How many times haven't I heard it said of me, "That fellow's paranoid"? Yes, I'm glad to admit it, because I have the ability to connect events that are seemingly unconnected. And when you do that, you begin to arrive at the truth. It's taken me 25 years to come to the conclusion that I have come to. And I want to tell you that one of the biggest things I discovered in my work was the existence of a supranational committee composed of 300 men. I came across this quite by accident when I was serving in Africa, in Angola, and I was given a series of documents which were only supposed to be handed in to top-level people. They were what we call above the top level of classification of intelligence documents. And there I discovered that whilst I thought I was in Africa fighting against the invasion of the communists, I was in fact fighting to introduce socialist regimes in the black African countries, and that I was actually working for a committee called the Committee of 300, also known in intelligence circles as the Olympians. I'll stop right there, and I want to digress for a moment and tell you the word intelligence has been bandied around a great deal in the United States. I've seen people writing this and that and the other intelligence newsletter. They really have no experience whatsoever. In 1986, I wrote a work called Mind Control, Metaphysics, Extremely Low Frequency Radiation, and Weather Modifications. And in that work, July the 8th, 1986, I said that the top-level intelligence organization in the United States was the National Reconnaissance Office. far bigger than the CIA and any of the other intelligence agencies. And by the way, we have about 10 different ones in the United States. And I even had the audacity to give the address of this organization. 3 weeks ago, Mr. Sam Donaldson, the gentleman who wears that beautiful toupee so effectively, he came on with the program in prime time and he said, this is one of the biggest scoops that ABC has ever had. And he told about the National Reconnaissance Organization. The exact same thing that I published 8 years earlier. I tell you this to set the stage so that you'll understand I do have some experience and that I know that of which I speak. You know, the American people are somewhat like the Irish. I'm sure you've heard the story of the Irishman who got shipwrecked, and after many days he was washed up on an island. And as he staggered along the beach, some people came out of the trees waving spears, and he said to them, is there a government here? And they said, yes. He said, well, then I'm against it. Liberty is based on individual freedom. We are individual people. We are not the mass. So disdainfully referred to by Karl Marx and the socialist writers. We objected to a tax of a penny a pound on tea when King George of the Venetian Party of the North, now that's probably the first time you've heard that expression. It took me 5 years of digging in the British Museum of London, in London, which I consider to be the finest repository of knowledge in the world, to come up with that name. That was what the party of King George was called, and we'll come to the reason for that. But our colonists said, we're not going to pay this penny a pound on tea. Today, we are being driven on our knees by a tyrannical government, which is imposing all sorts of taxes upon us, and worse than that, trammeling on and tramping on the Constitution of the United States of America, which is the second greatest document in the world next to the Bible. And if we could rebel against the mighty powers of King George III, the most potent force in the world at that time, then, ladies and gentlemen, then it is time that we rebelled against a federal government that is trammeling the Constitution underfoot every day of the week. King George III of the Venetian Party of the North did more than that. He sent Adam Smith, a servant of the British East India Company, to formulate a policy which he called free trade. And by the means of free trade, Adam Smith, the greatly beloved economist of the Marxists, the socialists, and the liberals, hoped to bring the small manufactories and the industries established by the colonists to their knees. Let me tell you unequivocally that free trade is piracy. There is no such thing as free trade. We have to reject this constant brainwashing to which we are subjected. Free trade began with Adam Smith and the British East India Company. Now, who is the British East India Company? They played a massive role in the history of the United States of America. Only you are not taught this in your schools or in your universities, but you need to know. In my book, The Committee of 300, which took 20 years of research, and incidentally, I was only a little bit behind with Karl Marx. He spent 30 years in the British Museum in London, where he got most of his things from. I point out that the British East India Company was the most powerful trading company in the world. They made their massive monies out of the dope trade. They first grew prime poppies in Kew Gardens in Kensington, London, got the best producing opium poppies. They then shipped them to Benares in India, where they began a massive plantation of poppies, opium producing poppies. They then used their famous tea clippers to transport the poppies in the form of raw opium to China. And by their military force, they imposed an opium policy on China that turned the Chinese nation into a nation of addicts. And they enforced this policy, which was known to the royal family and Lord Gladstone, the Prime Minister, and every one of the lords and ladies in England. And they made a massive, huge fortune in researching these documents in India House in London. I came across some of the manifests of the old tea clippers and the numbers of kegs of opium they carried in the values. And I totaled up these things, and I found to my astonishment that if we took 1970 as an optimum year for profits in General Motors and Ford, in 1 year, the opium trade with China was 3 times the profits in 1 year, the combined profits of Ford and General Motors in 1970. And this was shared by 300 people. That was the committee that ran the British East India Company. They all had equal voting rights. They could not outvote each other, and of course they were sworn to secrecy. The descendants of the British East India Company today run the United States. And I will hope to prove my thesis as we go along. They also interfered in the development of the United States on every occasion. They armed the Indians, they armed the people against the settlers who were pushing west. They ran the Hudson's Bay Company. They also ran so-called mission stations in China and got these missionaries who were really not missionaries at all to push opium on the Chinese. And I remember a conversation with the late Gamal Abdel Nasser of Egypt, Prime Minister of Egypt, President of Egypt, and Mohammed Aikel, one of the top journalists, with Chow En-lai. And Chow En-lai told him, he said, you know, the Americans and the British made China a nation of opium addicts. And now with the Vietnam War, it's our turn. We are going to make the Americans a nation of opium addicts. So you can see the influence, the evil, baleful influence of the British East India Company upon the great nation of the United States of America. They were the ones who financed the war. They put up the money for the British troops to buy the Hessian mercenaries and to fight the colonists. Those brave 3%, let me remind you that only 3% of the people took arms and stood up against the mighty army of King George III. We are 3% here this morning, but that's enough for us to withstand the mighty force of the federal government of the United States of America. These 300 men in the Committee of 300 still run the world today with an iron fist. Their wealth is untold, cannot be measured. I know I looked at some of the records that I could find in Italy, in Rome. I've done most of my work on location, and this has always been invaluable to me. And I came across the families in Italy who were called the Fondi, meaning the people who had all the money. They were all members of the Committee of 300, the Lucatis, the Recanatis, the Volpi du Miseratis. These people are so wealthy that they would make David Rockefeller look like a piker. That is how rich they are. And this is the committee that runs the world. Now, in my book, The Committee of 300, I name every one of them. This is not a book that talks about they. It gives you specifics. And I must say I do the same thing in my new book, Socialism, The Road to Slavery, which was 10 years in researching. On July the 4th, 1789, George Washington told the Congress, it is necessary for us to impose tariffs to protect the manufactories of our colonies. That was the first trade barrier. Now, let us dispose for once and for all with the words that have been implanted on our minds, like isolationist, and you are for restricted trade, and you are against global trade. The United States of America did not grow great on global trade. The United States of America grew great on the hard labor of the people who lived in those days and the wise protection barriers put up by President George Washington, because immediately after the war, the British to try to down the United States through so-called free trade, which is nothing but piracy. Free trade, ladies and gentlemen, is a one-way street which allows other countries to dump their products on our markets to the detriment of our own people. That's what free trade is. It's strictly a one-way street. The trade barriers were increased by Lincoln, Garfield, and McKinley, and all three presidents paid with their lives for that policy. Disraeli was particularly incensed with Lincoln. Disraeli was the British Prime Minister at the time, and he ordered British MI6 to assassinate Lincoln, which is what they did. The same way as British MI6 publicly executed President John F. Kennedy at a later time. Our founding fathers and our presidents saw the value of trade barriers. They realized that we, if we wanted to progress, were not to be the dumping ground of the world. And I'm going to leave that subject for now and return to it later. The format that I want to use this morning is the type of questions that are most often asked of me. I've spoken to hundreds of thousands of people across the United States and worldwide. And I've been on many, many radio shows. And these type of questions, we note them. And this is what comes up most of all. Who and what is the Committee of 300? Well, I've dealt with that. I've told you this is a supranational body that knows no boundaries, respects the laws of no countries. The first time that they were publicly announced was by a German socialist by the name of Walter Rathenau. I'll give you some background of Walter Rathenau. He was the financial advisor to the Kaiser of Germany, and he was also the financial advisor to the Rothschilds, the French family Rothschild. So he must have known what he's talking about. He made an astonishing statement in 1934. He said, there is a committee of 300 men that rule the world. They are known only to each other, and nothing happens without their consent. When former head of state Mikhail Gorbachev visited the United States a few years ago, flanked by George Bush and Quayle, he opened his Gorbachev Foundation in the United States. And he let slip, he said, this is being done with the approval of the Committee of 300. CNN cameras were on him. They immediately switched. Now, I wrote to CNN and I said, could I have a transcript of this program? Which they said was available. I never got a reply. I followed it up with letter after letter, but nothing ever came of it. The point I'm trying to make, ladies and gentlemen, is that the federal government, the secret upper-level parallel government that runs the United States, does not want you to know that you have an upper-level parallel government that calls the shots, that dictates what is going to happen to your life and mine. So that's how I found out about the Committee of 300. The next question is, what are their goals? Their goals are a one world government, latterly called the New World Order. The one world government began with King George III. At the time that the colonists were brave enough to take him on, King George was already busy formulating a one world government, and he had lined up at least 50 countries that were willing to come into this future world dictatorship with him. The goals then, very simply stated, are to make the world over into a one world, new world order dictatorship controlled utterly and completely by this Committee of 300. How can they possibly carry out their goals? That's the next question that I'm often asked. They do it by dint and by virtue of their fantastic wealth and the fact that they control thousands of the top banking institutions, the political organizations, insurance companies. In fact, one of the giant insurance companies The man called me and said, "Do you mean to tell me that they are controlling the Metropolitan of New York?" I said, "The Metropolitan of New York is peanuts." He said, "How can you say that? That's a giant American company." I said, "Well, compared with the Sicurezza, the Generali di Venezia, it's peanuts. That's the biggest insurance company in the world. They control in that organization everything that happens in the world in the insurance field comes out of Venice. That's why Venice is so important, because in Venice we have the black nobility. Now that has nothing to do with the color of the skin of the people, and I'm going to come back to them as we go along. So the goals are a one world dictatorship of the most brutal kind, and how they carry it out is they have these interface banks, insurance companies, mining conglomerates, every conceivable control in politics, including the Democrat Party of the United States, which is, of course, since 1980 behind closed doors at a secret caucus in Washington, D.C. The Democrat hierarchy took on the goals of the old Socialist Party USA, i.e., based upon the Communist Manifesto of 1848. If you have a copy of my book, and I'm not pushing it, but in my book, The Committee of 300, I list every one of their huge, gigantic corporations, how they interface. And this, ladies and gentlemen, is an eye-opener, because it gets right down to the nitty-gritty of your everyday life in the cities and towns across the United States. So they carry out their goals through existing organizations. And also, of course, they have built up some special organizations of their own. When I first started writing in America, when I came here in 1969, I revealed the existence of an organization called the Royal Institute for International Affairs, which is located at Chatham House in 10 St. James Square in London. I also revealed the existence of the Club of Rome, the Cini Foundation, the Montpellerin Society, the Order of St. John, which was known but not known. And I listed all of these secret societies that run the world as executive arms of the Committee of 300. So it controls the world through all of these. The Royal Institute for International Affairs is the executive arm of this committee, which gives instructions to the United States government to this very day. The chain of command is as follows. Every Secretary of State that has been appointed since 1919 is appointed by the Royal Institute for International Affairs. That may come as a shock for you. You think you vote and you put a conservative in the White House, and then he appoints supposedly or allegedly conservative people to carry out the policies that you wanted him to implement. Surprise, surprise. I ask you to find me a conservative Secretary of State since 1919. And if you search diligently and apply the correct rules, you'll come up blank. Every one of the Secretaries of State was chosen in London by the Secretary of State, as was Wilson, the President Wilson, as was Roosevelt, as was James Earl Carter. He was specially chosen because he had 3 mental breakdowns, and they felt he would be a good guy to manipulate. Oh, I'm talking facts. I'll tell you the story of that in my World in Review news magazine. I wrote, James, I'm digressing a bit here, but it's necessary to do that now and then. It's not a sign of a bad speaker, although I don't put any laurels around my own neck. But James Earl Carter was not a known entity in the American scene. I first heard of him through my intelligence contacts, particularly my French sources, who are one of the best in the world after MI6. And he told me, your next president is going to be a peanut farmer from Georgia. And I said, how come? He said, right now they're meeting at the Dorchester Hotel in London. And if you get your fanny over there, he said, you'll find that there's a lot of goings on you might like to look at. And lo and behold, that's what is happening. The Royal Institute for International Affairs had ordered David Rockefeller to find a candidate who was totally weak, preferably a little mentally weak. And they took one of the greatest brainwashing specialists in the world, trained by the Tavistock Institute for Human Relations, Dr. Peter Bourne, on the job. And he said, it's funny you should say that. One of my patients is a guy from Georgia, James Earl Carter, and this guy can't take rejection, and he's been to me 3 times for a nervous breakdown. So they hiked Carter over to London and feted him at the Dorchester Hotel, which is a very ritzy place. And they feted him and wined and dined him. And the next thing we saw, Time, Newsweek, every newspaper in the country, James O. Carter. Now we, in our little magazine, World in Review, we told those of our subscribers, this man is your next president. We also did exactly the same thing with William Jefferson Clinton, because we had the story of the Club of Rome. We knew who Agnelli was. We knew that Agnelli had had a huge love affair with Mrs. Pamela Harriman, and that Mrs. Pamela Harriman was the doyen of the Democrat Party, and Mrs. Harriman had been given the task of finding the next president of the United States, a socialist. And she picked up Clinton and said, "You're our boy." But there's one snag. Clinton went up there, brushing his forelock back, said, "Well, you know, there's one problem. My wife's left me." So Mrs. Harriman was dumbfounded. She said, "Well, you better give me back in a hurry." And he said, "No, she doesn't want to come back to me because of my trice." He said, "No, she doesn't want to come back to me." My philanderings would have been a better word, but he said trice with other woman. So Mrs. Harriman sent for Mrs. Clinton, and she duly came to New York, and she sat her down and said, "Look, if you want to be the first lady of America with all the attendant prestige and power, you better forget about your husband's philanderings and get right back to him." And that is precisely what happened. And when I heard that had happened, I knew this guy was the next president. And we wrote that in our news magazine. And sure enough, a year later, here came marching into the scene William Jefferson Clinton. So the RIA, the Royal Institute for International Affairs, does control everything that happens in the United States. They give their orders to the Morgan Guarantee and Trust Bank on Wall Street. And the chief executive officer of that organization is Dennis Weatherstone. And he duly relays the orders over to the Secretary of State, whoever that happens to be. And he then relays the orders to the president. There was one exception to this, and that was during the illegal, 100% unconstitutional Gulf War. Now, I'm going to use a word, and I apologize to the ladies for this, but I need to tell you this graphically to illustrate the power that the Royal Institute for International Affairs exercises over the affairs of the United States of America, which was hesitating and didn't know whether he should get into the Gulf or not. The Prime Minister of Britain, Mrs. Margaret Thatcher, came over to the Committee of 300's headquarters at the Aspen Institute, Colorado, and this is the phone call that she had with George Bush. She said, "George, this is Margaret. Apologies to you, ladies president. Get your ass up here. I've got some orders for you about the Gulf War." And Bush went scurrying up there like a little messenger boy. And the next thing we know, there was this massive outpouring of propaganda to start a war against the nation of Iran, a nation that has never done this country one iota of harm. I use those illustrations in order to give you the extent of the control that is exercised by this Committee of 300. There are many other societies that are operating for the RIIA. The Illuminati, which has been around for many, many years. I've written a work called The Illuminati in America, 1784 to 1994. A lot of people think this is an ancient secret society that's gone away. They think that Adam Weishaupt had a quarrel with the Catholic Church and that's it. Don't you believe it? 13 of the top families in the United States are in the Illuminati today, and they have a big say on everything that happens politically in this country. Then we have the Society of Cincinnati, which I don't think many of you will have heard about. That is an ultra secret society to which every president of the United States is forced to belong, including our so-called conservative president. And I point this out to you to show you that it doesn't matter who is in the White House. This committee of 300, through the Royal Institute for International Affairs, through the Council on Foreign Relations, exercises complete control. But their strongest arm is called the Club of Rome. Now, when I first heard of the Club of Rome in 1969, I immediately began my investigation, and as on location. every one of them. The Club of Rome is one of the most insidious, baneful organizations in existence today, which has done intolerable, immeasurable harm to the United States of America. This Committee of 300 told a man called Aurelio Pecchi to form this Club of Rome with the main object of bringing down the industries and the agricultural development of the United States. He immediately wrote a paper in which he said there are too many people on the earth, and that the United States, with its industrial development, its agricultural development, is responsible for this curse of overpopulation. And he picked up the documentation for his work from Lord Bertrand Russell, a senior statesman of the Committee of 300. And Lord Bertrand Russell had written a work called The Impact of Science on Society. And if you can ever secure a copy of that book, which I doubt you'll be able to get, you will see in there that he said, the world is grossly overpopulated and we have to get rid of at least half of the world's population, and it doesn't matter how we do it. So the Club of Rome was instituted and organized to start an attack on the world's population using the United States as the whipping boy. And they came up with a paper called the Zero Growth Post-Industrial Plan for Industry and Agriculture for the United States of America. 3 days after that plan was accepted as official United States policy by James Earl Carter, I was able to, through my intelligence people, get a copy of this insidious document. Basically, what it said was that the middle class in the United States of America had to be destroyed because in the coming push to a world order, the middle class would be the stumbling block, because history had shown that the peasant class in ancient days, when they had revolted, were just easily crushed. There was no ancient days, but now has grown a new super class of people in the United States called the middle class, who had long-term employment, who had job security, who were well paid, who could afford to buy the products that were made by the United States and didn't need to buy products from China or anywhere else. And the Club of Rome post-industrial zero growth paper said this has got to stop. We have to bring down the middle class of the United States. And the way that we will do this, the way that we will accomplish this task is by crushing their industries. In 1980, based on this report, I wrote a small work, a booklet called The Death of the United States Steel Industry. And in that, I told of a French aristocrat by the name of Etienne d'Avignon. And I'm sure there's not a single steel worker in America out of a job who's ever heard of this man's name. But they put this aristocrat onto the job of destroying first the steel industry. In my book in 1980, I said that by 1985, we would have silent blast furnaces. The rolling mills would be stopped. There'd be no more shipbuilding. We'd have thousands of skilled workers who'd pass the skills of their trade down for generations, who were forever dispossessed of their jobs. If you go to the Northeast United States today, ladies and gentlemen, and I've just been up in Cleveland where I had a very good radio address I gave there, you will find that what I said in 1980 has unhappily come to pass. In 1970, the United States had 5,000 ships built by good United States know-how, using good United States steel. 5,000 ships sailing the high seas. Last year, we had exactly 270 such ships. And at least 50,000 steel workers permanently out of a job, jobs that will never come back. What happened? Did we suddenly lose our marbles? Did we suddenly lose that great American know-how of getting things done? Did we lack finances? Did we run out of money? No, none of those things happened. What happened was this dastardly Club of Rome had sent their emissaries to the United States to deliberately destroy our steel plants. And they did it by opening the doors of so-called free trade. And everybody who signed the NAFTA treaty and everybody who signs the GATT treaty when it passes is a traitor and a seditionist. Our mighty steel industry is destroyed. Our shipyards are silent. Our skilled workers are permanently without a job. And if you don't believe me, get the report of the Club of Rome. You know, when I came out in 1969 with my report on the Club of Rome, nobody had ever heard of it. And people, when they got it, said, "No, this guy's paranoid. There's no such organization. There's probably something to do with the Catholic Church." Well, surprise, surprise, 25 years later, last year, the Club of Rome celebrated its anniversary, and Alexander King, its chairman, stated, "The American people henceforth must get used to the idea that they will never, ever again in their lifetime have full employment." What a scandalous thing that our government is fully cooperating with this organization built up by the Royal Institute for International Affairs to destroy the middle class of the United States and to add to the policies of global genocide. That brings me to the next question. What is the Global 2000? Once again, when I heard about this policy, it was 3 days after it had been accepted by the United States government as its official policy. And the Global 2000 was a blueprint for mass genocide produced by the Club of Rome. Basically, what the Global 2000 calls for is the destruction of half of the world's population by the year 2050, hence the title 2000.
There you go.
They built a case based on Bertrand Russell and H.G. Wells' findings that the world was going to be overpopulated, would be a terrible place to live in. That was picked up by a fellow called Robert Strange McNamara, and a stranger individual you're not likely to meet in this world. And this fellow had a conference of all the leading bankers about 12 years ago, and he said the biggest menace facing the world today is the American middle class and overpopulation. He linked the two together. And he said, by the year 2050, this is the state of the world. All of these unfed, unwashed people, no jobs. He said, do we want to live in a world like that? So the Global 2000 was a genocidal plan to take care of the people of the United States who don't have any jobs, and like Alexander King said, are never going to get their jobs back, and the masses of people in other nations. That is why we had the sudden appearance of AIDS. When I was in the service, I was told there's a CAB experiment, that's chemical and bacteriological warfare experiment, going on in Sierra Leone in Africa. That's a remote corner of Africa, West Africa, just above Liberia. If you look at your map, your atlas, and you'll see where it's located. Why Liberia? Extremely hard country to get to. You have to fly from London. That's the only way you can get there. You land on an island, and then you've got to take a ferry across to the mainland. And of course, all people taking the ferry are heavily scrutinized. And I managed to work my way. I was told the Americans were doing the CAB experiment. I managed to work my way to within striking distance of a small mission station. And what I discovered was that these blacks were coming in from the bush to this mission station with broken arms or an ulcer on the leg or something like that. And they were ostensibly being treated there, but they were dead by the evening. What was actually going on was that the laboratory had been set up using Lassa fever virus. Now, at that time, Lassa fever was one of 4 viruses that could jump the human-animal barrier. And it was a deadly virus. They were trying to create a virus that could be mass-produced and it could be sent out through the World Health Organization to get rid of millions of people in the world. But the Lassa fever virus proved uncontrollable. It killed 3 scientists who were working there. So the orders came from Washington, burn the place to the ground, and that's exactly what they did within a radius of 100 miles. They bottled up some of these viruses they'd been experimenting with and took them back to the Centers for Disease Control in Atlanta. There they began again, but again they escaped and killed 3 more scientists. So they incinerated the whole laboratory, sealed it off and incinerated. The same experiments are now going on in Harvard University right now, but they're not using the Lassa fever virus. That has proved to be too tough for them to handle. Instead, the United States government gave millions of dollars to the United States military chemical and bacteriological warfare establishment at Fort Detrick. And they began experimenting with the AIDS virus. I knew about the AIDS 3 years before the word ever came out in the world, in the United States particularly, because of my field work in Sierra Leone. The British government used their Porton Down CAB facility. It's easier to get into the Bank of England vaults than to get into Porton Down. All the deadliest viruses in the world are being crafted there, in pursuance of the goal of Global 2000 to decimate the world. Shortly after this experiment had finished at Fort Detrick, the World Health Organization started a massive vaccination campaign. They said, for once and for all, we're going to wipe out the scourge of smallpox. They chose Africa and Brazil, launched a massive vaccination campaign. Immediately, AIDS began to appear. Thousands and thousands of people began dying of a strange new virus, which the World Health Organization then said had come from the bite of a green monkey. They forgot to tell you the green monkey's been there for centuries, and he'd been biting people, if he ever did, for centuries, but no disease of that nature had ever occurred. The World Health Organization deliberately took this virus, which was crafted from a series of animal viruses, including Mediavirus sheep, which destroys the brain, which is why you find AIDS patients get dementia probably first before any of the other AIDS-related complex diseases appear. And they began vaccinating innocent people on a massive scale, and they began dying like flies. Why Africa and why Brazil? Because those two countries had the biggest black population in the world. And I want to tell the black people of the United States of America, do not trust the Democrat Party. Do not trust government. Do not believe that government is your friend. To them, you are dispensable, the same way as we are. Millions of people died. I went through Uganda on an inspection tour, and I saw whole areas decimated where previously there had been small towns and villages. There was not a living soul in sight. And that is going on today. The AIDS epidemic is completely out of hand. It swept the world. It's been swept under the carpet in the United States of America. We were told that this is a disease which is passed by homosexuals. True enough, but that's not the primary cause of it. This is a crafted virus that was spread throughout the world to decimate the population. Coming behind them, and we reported this about 2 years ago in our World in Review News magazine, is the Vibro 19 cholera virus, the deadly killer. You get this cholera in the morning. If it's not immediately treated with massive doses of expensive antibiotics, you'll be dead in a day and a half. This epidemic swept India, carrying away millions of people. I don't know if you've heard of it in the press. I doubt it. Behind that is a deadly strain of malaria, and some of our forces in Somalia contracted this disease. A strain of malaria which acts almost like the HIV virus. It attacks the human immune system. And behind that, the Black Plague. Now, you've had some experience with Black Plague recently. Experiments were conducted in this area and in California with the Black Plague, distributing them, these plague viruses, to definitive areas by means of enfolded scalar waves using extremely low frequency radiation, which was a warfare technique developed in 1934 by the great Soviet virologist V.A. Gertrude. This is not Buck Rogers stuff, ladies and gentlemen. This is today's deadly truth. So some of the Indian reservations were targeted, and all of a sudden they began dying of Black Plague. And then we were told, well, the harvest mouse droppings are responsible. Well, the harvest mouse has been doing his droppings for centuries, but none of them got the Black Plague before that. But what happened immediately following the so-called population control meeting in Cairo, there was a sudden and violent outbreak of black plague in India. And it is still going on, and it is not under control. This is all part of the Global 2000 mass genocide plan. I know something about the Black Plague because in my research in the British Museum, I discovered that the Black Venetian nobility had never, none of their families or members had ever got the Black Plague. Yet the Black Plague, as you know, swept through Europe and killed half of the population of Europe. But none of their families ever got it. So I began seeking for the answers, and I found them in the Cairo Museum. So people said, well, how come if these things are true, how are they going to protect themselves? They being the Committee of 300, their servants and their families, they have the means of protecting themselves by certain types of herbal compounds mixed with sugar. And they also have, of course, the protection of extremely low frequency radiation, where using the technology developed by the great virologist Goethe, who proved that every living thing on this earth has a vibratory cycle, and is able to measure the vibratory cycle of various deadly viruses, and by vibrating them double their cycle, would kill them instantly. So that's one of the defensive weapons that these people have got that will kill the plague if they ever get it. The same technique, of course, will kill cancer cells, but the medical profession run by the Rockefeller family and all the pharmaceutical companies do not want you to know this, because when you go in for the doctor, he's going to write you a prescription for a chemical drug. There's no chemical drug benefit out of extremely low frequency radiation vibration. No profit to these people. So that's the Global 2000. Decimate the world's population and particularly hit hard the United States middle class. How are they financing all of this stuff? They're financing it through the Fondi, who I mentioned to you earlier, the Venetian black nobility. Now, why are they called the black nobility? They're called that because of the vileness of the evilness of their deeds. These families date back to the 11th centuries, the Lucatis, the Recanati. They were called, and the Guelphs, by the way, we'll come to them, they're particularly interesting. They were called that because of the evilness of their deeds. They make Lucrezia Borgia look like a Sunday school teacher. They had so much money, which is the outcome of the drug trade, the years of investing, the years of gaining control of every mining, mineral, gold, oil, natural resource of the world, that they can afford to finance these things. So the black nobility are the ancient aristocrats of Venice and Genoa, and they call that because of the nature of their deeds. The black Guelphs were one of the worst of them. Now, interesting enough, the Queen of England, Queen Elizabeth II, is a Guelph. She's not a Windsor. This is a title that was evolved in 1935 by her father to put researchers off the track. I like to include myself in that category, although I wasn't doing it then. I was much too young to be doing it, but he didn't like that certain people were getting hot on the track of who this royal family actually was. And so this was put out that they are the House of Windsor. They are not. They're the House of Guelph. And it's important for us to know that, because every time there's a financial crisis, it follows a meeting of the black Guelphs upon the Royal Britannia yacht of the Queen of England, which anchors off the coast of Venice. And all the world bankers meet over there and say, now, this is what we're going to do to country X. This is how we're going to control this worldwide situation. And then they go off and give their orders to everybody. So that is the way it is done. I told you earlier that they controlled the United States. Even in the days of President Lincoln, they had him assassinated on the orders of Disraeli. And they then, of course, in later years, were able to elect one of the worst socialists we've ever had the misfortune to suffer under, Woodrow Wilson. Wilson was elected by a ploy. Of course, they got Teddy Roosevelt and the Bull Moose Party running as a supposedly third candidate to siphon votes off so that Wilson could be elected as a socialist president. Now, our eyes have been fixed on Moscow. We've been led down the garden path, ladies and gentlemen. All of the time we've been looking at Moscow, and we've been told what demons they are in Moscow. Rightly so. But all the time this was going on, the Trojan horse of socialism in Washington, D.C. has been stealing our country away from us. And in my book, Socialism, The Road to Slavery, I give you a full and factual description of exactly how this was done. In 1898, the Fabian Society, a socialist organization, sent Ramsay MacDonald, Prime Minister of England, to the United States to spy out the land. He came back and he said, there are two things in the way. You have a very strong middle class and you have the Constitution of the United States, both of which have got to be destroyed before we can socialize America. The first step they took was getting a socialist president in office in the form of Woodrow Wilson. Woodrow Wilson was controlled out of England by Sir William Wiseman, head of the North American desk of MI6. Now, in case you don't know MI6, it is the most powerful and the oldest of all intelligence agencies in the world. They taught the CIA, they taught the Vatican intelligence, they taught the French intelligence, they taught the Mossad, they taught the Cheka. Captain Hill of MI6 went out and set up Mossad, and Captain Hill went to Russia and helped the Bolsheviks set up their single-cell apparatus. Sir William Wiseman was the controller of Wilson through Colonel House. Now, who was Colonel House? He was an unknown person who emerged out of Texas. His father served the Rothschilds during the Civil War, and he emerged out of the war as the only person in Texas who'd made any money. And House was sent to Washington in order to control the first socialist president, and he took his orders from Wiseman, and House lived about a few blocks away from Wilson, and above him, Wiseman had an apartment. And that type of control is not gone. It is still here to this very day, right now, as I speak to you. Other questions? Give us some examples of what you're talking. How do we know that what you're saying is true? I'll refer you to the great soldier son of the United States of America, General Douglas MacArthur, a great patriot, a great warrior, a great Christian. Douglas MacArthur was in Korea. He and General Stratomayor of the Air Force devised a plan that would have put China out of action for the next 50 years. He submitted this plan to Washington. An arch socialist, one of the most vilest preachers who ever walked this earth, by the name of Dean Rusk, immediately summoned the President of the United States to a meeting in Blair House. And he said, Mr. President, we have seen the plan submitted by General Douglas MacArthur, and there's no way in the world that you can allow him to implement this plan. And Truman said, why not? He said, you know very well that anything that relates to China has to be cleared by the Royal Institute for International Affairs first. And he said, they don't want you to do this. And MacArthur was not allowed to carry out his plan. And 50,000 sons, beautiful Americans, were slaughtered on the battlefields of Korea needlessly because of orders from the Royal Institute for International Affairs. And that same institute is controlling President William Jefferson Clinton to this day. MacArthur was eventually bowler-hatted on the orders of the British government. I mentioned earlier the death of John F. Kennedy. Given the methods that are well known in intelligence circles of how to get rid of bothersome people, it would have been a very simple matter to make it look as though Kennedy had died of a heart attack or some other natural cause.
Yeah, exactly.
Instead of that, in order to warn every president that would follow in his wake, every powerful person in this country in the know, you do not kick over the traces. You obey us, or you will see what will happen to you. Kennedy was publicly and brutally executed in a plan carried out by British MI6 under the control of Sir William Stevenson.
Why do you think they
And
target
his
people
lieutenant,
now?
a Canadian citizen by the name of Major Louis Mortimer Bloomfield. Now, you won't get that in any of the accounts of the Kennedy assassination. You'll find it in my book, The Committee of 300. You'll also find it in my monographs about the Kennedy assassination. Who are these people? Sir William Stevenson ran American intelligence throughout the Second World War out of the RCA building in New York. His second in command, a Canadian citizen, Major Louis Mortimer Bloomfield, ran Division 5 of the FBI counterintelligence. You want examples of how Britain controls this country? I have given you them. I've also told you that every Secretary of State since 1919 is selected by the Royal Institute for International Affairs on the orders of the Committee of 300. Why is this? We go to these conventions and there's all the hoopla in the world. The balloons are flying, the straw voters are in the air. Bush has been elected conservative president. Reagan has been elected. What happens in reality? The Secretary of State, who's charged with carrying out the policies, subverts each and every one of them. You show me a Secretary of State that has acted in the best interest of the United States of America since 1919, and I will give you the only money that I've got in the bank, which is about $1,500. You're welcome to it, because I know that you will not be able to do that. Every Secretary of State has subverted and acted in a treasonable manner towards the people of this great country. And when they haven't done it directly, they've done it through surrogates like Lachlan Curry, who ordered the military to jettison a shipment of arms destined for the great Chinese leader, Chiang Kai-shek, to jettison overboard these arms in the Indian Ocean. And that's exactly what they did. We think that we elect our presidents. Ladies and gentlemen, we do not elect our presidents. They are selected for us long before we'd even heard of them. And I've given you 2 examples this morning of how this is done.
Anyone goes to Illuminati. And committee. Of the 300. And by Dr. John Common. Get this spelling right. Bear with me. And it's on the website. Seymour definitely being blocked and hacked 2 hours ago. I've been streaming this. They're blocking people getting into the network, so I'm just going to play this out for another 10 minutes because it's that time in the UK.
The 300 office at Aspen keeps a tight control over every political event that takes place in this country. And it was this office, through Margaret Thatcher, that ordered President Bush to violate the Constitution of the United States of America and to violate his own personal oath to uphold the laws of the United States by sending our troops to the Gulf War against Iraq, a nation that had never done us any harm. And we did it by the dirtiest of dirtiest tricks. We got the daughter of one of the Al-Shabaab clan, there are over 400 of these people, and these are the most degenerate, disgusting people that you'd ever come across. The ruler has 140 wives. He doesn't have them all at the same time. When he gets tired of one, he says, I divorced thee 3 times, and she's gone. And the Iraqi troops came in there, and they turned it over to the Red Cross in Geneva, 140 marriage certificates. This is the man that your sons and your daughters are propping up today in Kuwait in a most illegal manner, in violation of the Constitution of the United States of America. And Bush did a Texas two-step around the Constitution. He did not get the mandatory declaration of war. I'm not a lawyer, but I've studied the annals of Congress, the congressional votes, and the congressional records for 25 years. And in those pages will be found more wisdom, more in-depth information about the Constitution than you'll ever get from any law school. Anyway, most of the law schools have professors far to the left of Marx. They don't know anything much about the Constitution. I talked to a few people, one lawyer in Congress. I said, what do you know about the Constitution? Well, I got 1 semester of law when I was at law school. And in that was something about the Constitution. Our Constitution is not even taught in the United States school system. Isn't that an utter shame and a resounding disgrace? Bush said the troops. Bush did not get a constitutional declaration of war. This is a very difficult area of the Constitution. It's probably one of the most complex areas of the Constitution. It's a 5-step process that involves both houses making separate declarations, then joint declarations, then the army has to be informed, and then the public has to be informed, and then we have to be told whether this is a private war or a public war, i.e. whether all the armed forces are going to be employed or only one branch. In so-called police actions, the president has 45 days to use only one branch of the service. Bush violated his oath of office by going to the United Nations, to which we do not belong, and getting them to give him a so-called color so that he could send our troops to the Gulf. Our troops to this day are in the Gulf illegally, in violation of the Constitution of America, and we're still paying for it. The story that the Gulf states put up all the money, you go and ask the General Accounting Office, as I did, how much money have they paid? We are still paying for the Gulf War. And now we've got another huge bill to meet, billions of dollars for Clinton's fantasies. To go out there and support this disgusting Al-Shabaab clan. I don't even know the story of Kuwait. It's really a horrendous one. I don't want to get into that too much, but that.
So I'll pause it there for a moment. Stop sharing. It's a very informative, educate yourself to look with the full documentary. And is that individual just zooming off? Yeah, that is a description, and the website is also in the chat. And the subject is 21 Goals Illuminati Committee of 300 by, and the author, as you just heard. So I need now to go. Been here 2 hours, I think. And this is just evidence of the blocking. I'm just going to quote how many IPs are hacking into my network. That's why I do not get anyone coming into my stream. Right. I'm quoting for the record 947.802.659 IP hackers into my location. Now we got, I'm just going to click on this, all different IPs and sources of IP locations. Desperate, aren't they? So peer block is the software. Right.